Joining us on the line first is Larry Elder, longtime friend. He's host of the talk show, The Larry Elder Show, author of the best-selling book, The 10 Things You Can't Say in America. His latest documentary, Uncle Tom, explores what it's like to be a minority within a minority, a black conservative. Larry, good to talk to you, sir.
Good to talk to you too, Ben. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. So watching all of these protests move forward, I've been saying over and over, it feels like most Americans agree on a few basic things. Police brutality is bad, racism is bad, and rioting and looting are bad. And yet somehow we are now fighting over the basic idea that rioting and looting might be okay, that actually police brutality is inherently racism, and that racism is not only widespread in police departments across the United States, but that America at root is a racist country that must be punished for its sins. That's what the kneeling seems like. How do you interpret the protests?
Well, I interpret it the same way you do. I mean, it's outrageous. Look, the idea that the police are out to get black people is simply not borne out by the facts. If that were the case, maybe I'd be down there with them picketing as well. It's just not true. It's been studied many times. There's a Harvard economist named Roland Fryer, and he found out that the police not only were not using deadly force disproportionately against black people, but that the police were more hesitant, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black person than a white person. He happened to be black. He said it was the most surprising finding of his career because intuitively he just knew that all these stories about Freddie Gray and Eric Gardner suggested that there was a deep-seated problem, and he found that it wasn't the case. There is another study that was done, published in a publication put out by the National Academy of Sciences, where they looked at every police shooting in 2015, 2016, could not find any kind of pattern of abuse of force against black people. And furthermore, only 9 black people were killed unarmed by the police, shot and killed last year. There were 19 whites who were unarmed who were shot and killed by the police last year. Most people can't name an unarmed white person who was killed, but we can always name unarmed black people because the media runs with them. In comes Van Jones, in comes CNN, in comes MSNBC, because it advanced their narrative that racism remains a major problem in America. When in fact, if you look at homicides, about half of the homicide victims in this country, Ben, are black, and almost all of these homicide victims were killed by other black people. The idea that cops are mowing down black people, or even white people are mowing down black people, is simply not borne out by the facts. Virtually all the black people who are killed in this country are killed by other black people. Of the interracial black-white homicides, and there are some, last year there were around 750, 500 whites were killed by blacks, 250 blacks were killed by whites. So whites at over 60% of the population were killing fewer blacks than blacks were at 13% of the population killing whites. And a young black kid is around 8 times more likely to be a homicide victim than a young white kid. In fact, the top preventable cause of death for young whites is accidents, like car accidents. The top cause of death, whether preventable or otherwise, for young blacks is homicide, almost always at the hands of another black person. And regarding the cops, according to the CDC, in the last 45, 55 years, police killings of blacks have declined 75%, while police shootings of whites have flatlined. So it is simply not true. Finally, it's not like this thing is not surveyed. Every 2 or 3 years, the government does something called the Police Public Contact Survey, and they ask 60,000 Americans, did you have contact with the police last year? If the answer is yes, tell me about your contact. How were you treated? What was said? They can't find any pattern at all of abuse against black people. It is not true. And just being not true would be neither here nor there. The left believes a lot of stupid things. But this is not true, and it's getting people killed. Why? Because it angers young blacks, and if you're pulled over and you believe that the cops are out to get you, why shouldn't you have a defensive attitude? And automatically you create greater tension where bad things are more likely to happen. The other thing is, on the part of cops, if I'm a cop and I'm accused of being racist, why would I be proactive? I'll just deal with the 911 calls. I'm not going to try and stop crime. I'm not going to look around trying to see if anything looks suspicious. What's the upside? All I'll do is be called a racist, so I'm not doing it. So what happens is the cops go into a mode called the Ferguson effect, which is to become more and more passive. Bad guys know it. Crime goes up, and the very people that the Black Lives Matter crowd claims they care about are the ones who are hurt. Well done, people. Well done.
So, Larry, when you look at the poll differentials by race, people trusting police, that the police have the best interests of the community in mind. Among white Americans, 77%. Among Hispanic Americans, 62%. Among black Americans, it is 36%. Is this a reflection of people just swallowing a media narrative, or is this a reflection of sort of the fact that if there are a lot of police encounters in your community, you're more likely to have a negative police encounter, or is it both? Because it is true that obviously there are a lot more by percentage police encounters between black Americans and members of the police force than there are in white communities, namely because there's a lot more crime among members of the black community than there are in at least violent crime than in the white community.
Well, it turns out the numbers of people that have more than 3 contacts in any given year with the police, blacks and whites, are about the same. It's about 1.2 black men who've had more than 3 contacts with the police in any given year. It's about 1.5 for black men, 1.2 for white men. So it's not all that different. No, I think what drives the narrative, Ben, is the news. I remember a few years ago there was a poll in the LA Times where blacks were asked, "How do you feel about your local police?" And 80% of blacks had a positive view, about the same as whites did. But then Rodney King happened, some incidents happened, and then it changes. So I think it depends on what's in the news cycle. Most black people want a heavy police presence. I have a friend who's the captain of the California National Guard. And during the second Rodney King trial, in case it went sideways, they deployed the National Guard in the inner city to make sure that there wouldn't be any violence. And he told me that men and women, middle age and older, were coming out of their homes, coming up to him saying, "Why is it you guys are only here because you're anticipating some sort of violence because of a Rodney King jury? Why aren't you here every single day? We need you here." The majority of people living in the inner city are hardworking, drug abstaining, law-abiding citizens who want the police to be there. So the loudmouths, the "we shall overcome," the "no justice, no peace" types represent a numerical minority. Also, it's been studied what happens to communities when you riot and you trash the property values. The property values never catch up, incomes never catch up, and frequently the businesses that are destroyed never return, and the very same people who looted and destroyed are now crying racism because those businesses don't want to come back and rebuild. It's ridiculous what's going on right now.
Yeah, Larry, one of the things that really has disturbed me is the unwillingness of anybody to discuss specific solutions, because this is always what happens in these situations, is that it's much more fun to protest and shout slogans like Black Lives Matter in the tacit assumption that for a lot of people, Black lives don't matter, right? Ashton Kutcher just openly said that. He said, well, the reason we say Black Lives Matter is because there are so many Americans who believe they don't. And I just keep looking around going, who? Like, seriously, who? I don't know a single American, black, white, or green, who doesn't know the name of Ahmaud Arbery, or doesn't know the name of George Floyd, or doesn't know the name of Michael Brown or Freddie Gray. And by the way, not all those cases are the same. Right? I mean, a lot of these cases have differential fact patterns. I mean, the Michael Brown case, he was actually justifiably shot according to a jury. But the attempt to avoid specific conversations in order to pursue a broader narrative is really disheartening, especially because I know, Larry Elder, you've been a libertarian for a long time, I mean, longer than I have, because I remember being on your show when I was 16 years old and I was just getting politically active. And you have been claiming for a long time that things like police unions are kind of a problem. And the doctrine of qualified immunity, which suggests that you are granted immunity from civil suit if you move beyond your authority as a police officer. Even Clarence Thomas has opposed that. And yet nobody wants to talk about solutions because we might actually find some common ground. It seems like the goal here is to not find common ground.
Well, I think one of the reasons, Ben, nobody wants to talk about solutions is because you have to have a problem first. If the problem is police brutality against blacks, it's not true. Of course, there's no solution for that. That's why people just talk and talk and talk. After Dylan Roof killed all those churchgoers at their church in Charleston, I was watching the Morning Joe show, and one of the presidential candidates, Martin O'Malley, was on. And he was talking about the institutional racism. We need to deal with it. We need to deal with it. We need to deal with it. And one of the co-panelists was a guy named Mike Barnicle, who's a columnist with the Boston newspaper. And he said very innocently, he wasn't trying to trap him or stump him. He said, "What do we do about this, Martin?" And Martin, well, what we do, we have to acknowledge the. Actually, Martin, I don't know what you do about this, but we need to do something about it. Now, this guy used to be mayor of Baltimore, governor of Maryland, and you don't know what to do about the institutional racism that you just now bitched about. And the reason is because it's not true. And if it's not true, of course, there's no quote solution for it. The only thing that I recommend is the widespread use of body cams. And for the activists, it's probably going to help the cops more than it's going to help the civilians. There was the city in California called Rialto, 100,000 people, Ben. It is ethnically diverse, and the police were ordered to wear body cams. They didn't want to, but they did. And after a year or so, guess what happened? Police complaints against cops fell 90% because the civilians knew they were being taped. They stopped lying on the cops. Police use of force fell 50%, not because the police changed their behavior, but because the civilians did, and therefore the police didn't have to respond to them. The point is, a lot of people are lying on cops, not unlike the way Dorian Johnson, Michael Brown's friend, said, Michael Brown said, "Hands up, don't shoot." It turned out to be a complete lie. A lot of people are lying on the cops. The cops, there's some bad bad cops? Obviously, when you have an 800,000 group of people, there's going to be some bad cops. But the idea that they are routinely, systematically going after black people is simply not borne out by the evidence. Isn't that good news? Instead, I'm calling Uncle Tom, I'm calling self-loather, I'm calling all sorts of names. Instead of people saying, well, Larry, you're a little naive. I wish you were right, but here's why I think you're wrong. I don't get that. I just get a bunch of names because people don't want to deal with the uncomfortable truth that what's going on right now in our society has nothing to do with what the police are doing and everything to do with our failure to take advantage of available opportunities.
Now, Larry Elder, he is the author of a boatload of great books. One of them, The 10 Things You Can't Say in America, New York Times bestseller. His latest documentary is called Uncle Tom, exploring what it's like to be a conservative black American. So, Larry, final question for you. The LAPD obviously has, for some odd reason, come under significant scrutiny. I don't know why we have riots and looting in Los Angeles when this was an instance of police brutality in Minneapolis. But
right.
I guess that's the way this works now. Eric Garcetti, our idiot mayor, who has allowed homelessness to run rampant throughout the city, decided that it would be a good idea to allow the looting to just take place across the city, allow cop cars to be burned and defaced at will, allow Melrose Boulevard to basically become a trash heap, allow Fairfax to have all sorts of stores broken into and looted. And now he is saying that he wants to cut $150 million from the police budget. So I'm really optimistic about the direction of the city. How are you feeling about it?
I have a two-step plan to save California. Keep the illegal aliens, deport the Democrats. This is a state, as you know, that's run by Democrats. There isn't a single Republican elected statewide. They don't have just majorities in the Senate and the Assembly. They have supermajorities, so they don't even need Republicans. And this is what happens. This is the end game when you have a state that's run totally by Democrats. The budget is out of control. Homelessness is out of control. The price of a home is probably 50% higher than it would be but for the regulations, according to Lee Ohanian from UCLA. So this is what we have. I'm not optimistic either. I'm not optimistic at all. I think sooner or later, however, checks have to bounce. We have a $1.5 trillion unfunded pension liability. Sooner or later, Ben, checks are going to bounce, and then maybe, just maybe, people will then begin to rethink. But until then, I'm not terribly hopeful.
Now, Larry Elder, again, check out his show, The Larry Elder Show, and he's author of the book 10 Things You Can't Say in America, among other great books. His latest documentary is called Uncle Tom. Larry, thanks for your time. Great to talk to you, dude.
And Ben, you are one magnificent man. I don't know if people realize what a Renaissance person you are. A musician, a writer. You've written plays. I saw you playing the violin. Incredible. Plus, you're brilliant. I mean, Ben, you're the only person who speaks faster than I do. I'm impressed.
I appreciate it, Larry. Go check out his documentary, Uncle Tom, and check out his show as well. Larry is an American institution. I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you stay up to date on all of our future content.